Tonight we're going somewhere rather special. Somewhere you've probably seen 1,000 times in photographs and films, but never quite like this. Tonight, you're not a tourist standing at the gates. You're not part of a crowd craning to catch a glimpse of a balcony appearance. Tonight you are an honoured guest, and the doors are opening just for you. Buckingham Palace. The very name conjures images of grandeur and history, of ceremonies watched by millions, of a building that has stood at the heart of British life for nearly 2 centuries. But behind those famous gates, beyond the staterooms and the official portraits, there are quiet corridors where footsteps echo softly. There are bedrooms where kings and queens have closed their eyes and drifted into sleep, just as you will tonight. So let your body settle. Let the day fall away from your shoulders. And when you're ready, we'll walk together through the evening light, through gates that rarely open, into a world of gilt and velvet and extraordinary stillness. This is what it feels like to fall asleep inside Buckingham Palace. The evening is settling over London like a soft grey blanket. The rush hour crowds have thinned, and the city is entering that gentle transition between day and night, when everything seems to slow down just a little. You find yourself walking along the Mall, that grand ceremonial avenue that stretches from Trafalgar Square toward the palace. The trees that line the road are swaying gently in the evening breeze, their leaves rustling with a sound like distant whispers. Ahead of you, catching the last golden light of the setting sun, stands the Victoria Memorial. This enormous monument of white marble rises up in front of the palace gates, crowned by a gilded figure of victory. Queen Victoria herself sits in bronze at its centre, gazing eternally toward the palace that bears such a complicated relationship to her memory. She was the first monarch to make Buckingham Palace a true home, and yet she came to associate it with grief after her beloved Albert died. But we'll come to that story later, when the night is deeper and dreams come more easily. For now you pause at the memorial to take in the view. The palace facade stretches before you, that familiar grey-white Portland stone front that appears on postcards around the world. 775 rooms lie behind that facade. 52 royal and guest bedrooms, 188 staff bedrooms, 92 offices, 78 bathrooms. The numbers are almost impossible to hold in your mind, so don't try. Just let your eyes rest on those rows of windows, some already glowing with warm light against the dimming sky. What strikes you, perhaps for the first time, is how relatively recent this building is, or at least the building you're looking at. The grand facade you see today wasn't completed until 1913, just over a century ago. It was added by King George V, who wanted to give the palace a more imposing front suitable for a great empire. But the story of this place begins much earlier, in a time when this patch of London was something very different indeed. Close your eyes for a moment and try to imagine this land 400 years ago. Where the palace now stands, there was marshland, wet, boggy ground where the Tyburn stream wound its way toward the Thames. Not a promising location for a grand residence, you might think. And yet someone saw potential here. In 1603, King James I had an idea. He wanted to cultivate mulberry trees to establish a silk industry in England. The logic seemed sound enough. Silkworms feed on mulberry leaves, and silk was a valuable commodity that England was importing at great expense from abroad. So James planted a mulberry garden on this very site. Unfortunately, he planted the wrong type of mulberry. Silkworms prefer white mulberry trees, but James had filled his garden with black mulberries. The silk industry never materialized. It was one of the first recorded examples of a grand English economic venture that failed due to poor planning, and certainly not the last. But the mulberry garden remained, and the land passed through various hands over the following decades. By the late 17th century, a gentleman named John Sheffield had acquired the site. Sheffield was the first Duke of Buckingham and Normanby, a nobleman, politician and poet of some modest reputation. He was also enormously wealthy, and in 1703 he began construction on a house befitting his status. Buckingham House, as it was called, was not a palace. It was a private gentleman's residence, though certainly a grand one. The Duke reportedly spent around £7,000 on the original construction, a substantial sum at the time, perhaps equivalent to several £1,000,000 today when you account for the changing value of money across 3 centuries. The house was built in a fashionable Baroque style, with a central block and 2 wings extending forward to embrace a forecourt. It sat at the western end of St James's Park, enjoying views across the parkland toward Westminster. The Duke didn't live long to enjoy his creation. He died in 1721, and the house passed to his illegitimate son Charles Sheffield. But Charles had financial difficulties, a pattern that would repeat itself with later occupants, and in 1761 he sold the house to King George III. George paid approximately £21,000 for Buckingham House. He wasn't looking for a new official residence. The court remained at nearby St James's Palace for formal occasions. Instead, George wanted a comfortable family home for his wife, Queen Charlotte, and their growing brood of children. They would eventually have 15 children together, and St James's Palace, while grand, was not particularly suited to family life. Queen Charlotte moved into Buckingham House and made it her own. She was a cultured woman with interests in botany and music, and she transformed the house into what contemporaries called the Queen's House. It became known for its warmth and domesticity, at least by royal standards. The family kept their exotic animals in the grounds. Elephants and zebras were housed here at various points. It was a place for birthday celebrations and informal gatherings rather than stiff state occasions. George III and Queen Charlotte raised their children here, and the king added to his collections, purchasing artworks and books that would eventually form the foundation of the royal collection and contribute to the establishment of the British Library. The economics of royal collecting in this period were rather different from today. There was no clear distinction between the monarch's private wealth and the resources of the state. The king simply bought what appealed to him, and these purchases became, over time, national treasures held in trust for future generations. When George III began to suffer from his famous bouts of illness, almost certainly caused by the blood disorder porphyria, though some historians still debate this, the house became something of a retreat. In his later years, as his son took over as Prince Regent, the old king would wander the corridors of Buckingham House, sometimes confused, sometimes lucid, always a somewhat tragic figure in his own home. George III died in 1820, and the Prince Regent became King George IV. This new king was everything his father was not: extravagant, flamboyant, and absolutely determined to make his mark on London's architecture. George IV had already transformed the Royal Pavilion in Brighton into an Oriental fantasy. Now he turned his attention to the family home. The king engaged the architect John Nash, who was already working on what would become Regent Street and Regent's Park. to transform Buckingham House into a proper palace. The original budget was set at approximately £150,000. This was already a substantial sum, enough to cause some grumbling in Parliament. But George IV had expensive tastes, and John Nash was not the sort of architect to discourage a client from spending money. The transformation was dramatic. Nash kept the shell of the original house but wrapped it in new wings and added a grand entrance arch. The interiors were fitted out with the finest materials, marble from quarries across Europe, gilt bronze by the ton, silk wall coverings that cost a small fortune. Craftsmen were brought in from across the country and the continent. Sculptors, gilders, painters, and carpenters worked for years on the project. And the costs spiraled. 150,000 became 200,000. 200,000 became 400,000. Parliament demanded explanations. Commissions were established to investigate. But still the spending continued, reaching over £700,000 by the time the project was finally complete. More than 4 times the original estimate. To put this in perspective, the average skilled worker in England at that time might earn around £50 a year. The cost of transforming Buckingham Palace could have paid the annual wages of 14,000 workers. It was, by any measure, an extraordinary expenditure of public money on a royal residence. George IV died in 1830, before the palace was fully completed, and never spent a single night there. His brother, King William IV, who succeeded him, showed no interest in living in the new palace either. William preferred the smaller, more manageable Clarence House nearby. He actually offered to give Buckingham Palace to Parliament after the Houses of Parliament were destroyed by fire in 1834, but the offer was politely declined. And so the enormous palace sat largely empty, its grand rooms gathering dust, a monument to one king's extravagance and another's indifference. The architect John Nash was dismissed in disgrace, blamed for the cost overruns, though he was hardly the only one responsible. He died a few years later, his reputation in tatters. The palace was eventually completed by a more economical architect named Edward Blore, who added the east wing that faces the Mall, the very facade you're now looking at as you stand by the Victoria Memorial. The evening has grown darker as you've been standing here, lost in these thoughts of kings and architects and enormous sums of money. The palace windows are glowing more brightly now against the deep blue sky. Somewhere inside, chandeliers are being lit, fires are being laid in marble fireplaces, and in the Belgian suite, where visiting heads of state are accommodated, a bed is being prepared with crisp white linens and pillows of the finest down. That bed is for you tonight. You begin walking toward the gates. In reality, of course, these gates don't open for ordinary visitors after hours. But tonight, in this gentle space between waking and sleeping, the gates are swinging open. A guard nods to you as you pass, a small acknowledgement that you are expected, that you belong here for this one extraordinary evening. The gravel crunches softly beneath your feet as you cross the forecourt. The sound is oddly intimate in the quiet of the evening. You can hear the distant hum of London traffic, but it seems to belong to another world, a world you're leaving behind with each step. Ahead of you, the grand entrance awaits, its columns pale in the lamplight, its doors standing open. You pause at the threshold and take one last look back at the city. The lights of the Mall stretch toward Trafalgar Square. The sky is deepening from blue to indigo. Somewhere out there, millions of Londoners are going about their evening routines, cooking dinner, watching television, preparing for bed in ordinary homes, and here you stand, about to spend the night in the most famous house in England, perhaps in the world. You turn and step inside. The door closes softly behind you, and the sounds of the city fade to nothing. You are inside Buckingham Palace, and the night is just beginning. The first thing you notice is the light. After the deepening dusk outside, the interior of the palace seems to glow from within. Crystal chandeliers hang from ceilings so high they seem to disappear into shadow, each one holding dozens of candles that have been replaced, in modern times, by electric bulbs designed to mimic their warm flicker. The effect is of stepping into a golden dream, a world where light itself seems softer and more precious than in the ordinary world beyond these walls. You find yourself standing in the grand entrance, a space designed to impress from the very first moment. The floor beneath your feet is a geometric pattern of coloured marble, each piece cut and fitted with extraordinary precision. Red, cream and grey stones interlock in designs that draw your eye forward, deeper into the palace. The walls rise around you in warm cream tones, punctuated by columns of polished stone and alcoves holding classical sculptures. Everything here speaks of permanence, of wealth accumulated over generations, of craftsmanship so refined that it has become almost invisible in its perfection. A liveried footman appears, seemingly from nowhere, and offers a small bow of welcome. He doesn't speak, perhaps sensing that you're not quite ready for conversation, but gestures gently toward the grand staircase that rises ahead of you. You nod your thanks and begin to walk, your footsteps echoing softly in the vast space. As you approach the staircase, you find yourself thinking about John Nash and the impossible task he was given. When George IV commissioned the transformation of his mother's comfortable house into a palace fit for an empire, he was asking for nothing less than magic. The original Buckingham House had been elegant enough, but it was domestic in scale, designed for family life rather than state ceremony. Nash had to somehow preserve what could be preserved while creating something entirely new, something that would rival the great palaces of Europe. The grand staircase is perhaps Nash's finest achievement within these walls. It rises before you in a gentle curve, wide enough for several people to walk abreast, carpeted in deep crimson that seems to absorb sound and light alike. The balustrade is a masterwork of gilt bronze, depicting scrolling acanthus leaves and classical motifs that catch the light and hold it. Above you, a glass dome admits whatever natural light remains in the evening sky, supplemented now by the warm glow of hidden electric lights. You begin to climb, and with each step you rise further into the palace's embrace. The carpet is thick beneath your feet, cushioning each footfall. Your hand trails along the cool bronze of the balustrade, feeling the slight irregularities that reveal this was made by human hands, not machines. Somewhere above you, a clock chimes the hour, its tone deep and resonant, the sound of time itself being measured within these ancient walls. On the walls around you hang portraits of those who came before. Kings and queens, princes and princesses, their painted eyes seeming to follow your progress up the stairs. Some wear the elaborate dress of centuries past, powdered wigs, silk gowns, military uniforms heavy with medals and decorations. Others are more recent, captured in the more naturalistic style of modern portraiture. All of them lived within these walls, climbed these very stairs, heard this same clock marking the passage of their days. The cost of creating this staircase alone would have been staggering. The gilt bronze balustrade required the work of specialist metalworkers who spent years perfecting each section. The marble came from quarries in Italy and Belgium, shipped across the sea and then transported overland to London. The plasterers who created the ornate ceiling worked from scaffolding for months on end, applying layer after layer of decorative moulding. The painters who executed the ceiling murals were among the finest artists of their day, commanding fees that would have kept an ordinary family comfortable for years. When Parliament received the bills for all this work, there was outrage. Members stood in the House of Commons and denounced the extravagance, the waste, the sheer effrontery of spending public money on such luxuries, while ordinary citizens struggled with poverty and want. The newspapers of the day were filled with criticism of George IV and his architect, portraying them as profligate spendthrifts out of touch with the realities of their nation. And yet here the staircase stands, nearly 2 centuries later, still magnificent, still taking the breath away from everyone who climbs it. The workers who created it are long forgotten, their names lost to history, but their craftsmanship endures. The politicians who complained about the cost are remembered only by historians, but the object of their complaints has become a symbol of national identity. It's a curious thing how time changes our perspective on expenditure. What seemed wasteful to one generation becomes priceless heritage to the next. You reached the top of the stairs and paused to catch your breath. Though the climb wasn't particularly strenuous, it's more that you need a moment to absorb what you're seeing. Before you stretches a long corridor, its walls hung with paintings in gilded frames, its ceiling decorated with more of that intricate plasterwork, its floor covered in carpet so thick your feet seem to sink into it with each step. This is the principal floor of the palace where the staterooms are located. These are the rooms you might have glimpsed in photographs or television broadcasts, the grand spaces where state banquets are held, where ambassadors present their credentials, where the monarch receives prime ministers and presidents. During the day, these rooms bustle with activity, with servants polishing silver and arranging flowers, with officials preparing for the next ceremony or reception. But now, in the quiet of the evening, they are still and peaceful, waiting in golden silence. The transformation from house to palace required not just architectural changes, but an entirely new way of thinking about the building. George III's Buckingham House had been arranged for comfort and privacy, with relatively small rooms suited to family life. George IV's Buckingham Palace needed to accommodate hundreds of guests at state occasions, to provide appropriate settings for the rituals of monarchy, to project an image of power and permanence that would impress foreign dignitaries and reassure British subjects alike. Nash solved this problem by essentially wrapping the old house in new construction. The original building became the core of a much larger structure, with new wings extending to the north and south, and new state rooms of enormous scale, arranged in a sequence designed to build anticipation as visitors moved through them. Each room would be grander than the last, leading ultimately to the throne room, where the symbolic heart of the monarchy would be displayed. The economics of this construction project were complicated by the political realities of the time. George IV was not a popular king. He had spent his years as Prince Regent accumulating debts and scandals, and his treatment of his wife, Queen Caroline, had alienated much of the public. Parliament was reluctant to fund his extravagances, and yet the king was determined to have his palace. The result was a constant negotiation between royal ambition and parliamentary parsimony, with Nash caught in the middle. The original estimate of £150,000 was almost certainly unrealistic from the start. Nash may have deliberately lowballed the figure to secure approval, knowing that once construction began, it would be difficult to stop, or he may have genuinely underestimated the costs, failing to anticipate the king's endless request for changes and additions. Either way, the budget quickly proved inadequate. By 1828, expenditure had reached £432,000, and the palace was still far from complete. A parliamentary committee was established to investigate, and its report was damning. Nash was accused of poor management, of failing to keep proper accounts, of allowing the king's wishes to override financial prudence. The architect defended himself vigorously, pointing out that the king had personally approved every expenditure, but the political damage was done. When George IV died in 1830, Nash lost his most important patron. The new king, William IV, had no interest in continuing his brother's grand project, and Nash was dismissed from the work. He retired to his country house and died in 1835, his reputation never fully recovered. It was a melancholy end for a man who had done so much to shape the face of London, from Regent Street to Regent's Park to this very building you're now exploring. You walk slowly down the corridor, pausing occasionally to examine a painting or peer into a room. The palace is so vast that you could spend days exploring and still not see everything. There are rooms within rooms, corridors that branch into other corridors, staircases that lead to floors you didn't know existed. The building has grown organically over nearly 2 centuries, with each generation of monarchs adding their own touches, their own improvements, their own inevitable repairs. The cost of maintaining such a building is almost beyond comprehension. The sovereign grant which funds the official duties of the monarchy, including the upkeep of the royal palaces, amounts to approximately £86 million per year in recent times. A significant portion of this goes simply to keeping buildings like Buckingham Palace from falling into disrepair. The stonework must be cleaned and repaired. The roofs must be kept watertight. The electrical systems and plumbing, much of which dates back decades, must be updated to meet modern safety standards. In 2016, a major program of works was announced, budgeted at £369 million over 10 years. This was described as essential maintenance, addressing problems that had accumulated over many years of underinvestment. The palace's boilers were more than 30 years old and prone to failure. The electrical wiring dated in some places to the 1950s and posed a fire risk. Lead pipes still carried water through parts of the building, requiring replacement for health reasons. Without this investment, officials warned, the palace might become unusable. The figures prompted the usual debates about value for money and the cost of the monarchy. Critics pointed out that £369 million could fund hospitals, or schools, or housing for those in need. Supporters argued that the palace is a national asset, a tourist attraction that draws millions of visitors to London each year, an economic engine that generates far more revenue than it consumes. Both arguments have merit, and the debate will likely continue for as long as there is a monarchy and a palace to house it. But standing here in the soft evening light, such debates seem very far away. The beauty of this place exists independently of its cost. The craftsmen who created these rooms were not thinking about parliamentary budgets or economic arguments. They were simply doing their best work, applying skills passed down through generations, creating something that would outlast their own brief lives by centuries. and they succeeded beyond anything they could have imagined. You come to a doorway and step through into a room that takes your breath away. This is the guard room, the first of the great staterooms, and it sets the tone for everything that follows. The walls are lined with marble, white and cool to the touch. Display cases hold ceremonial weapons and armour glittering in the lamplight. Above the fireplace hangs a portrait of a long-dead prince in military dress, his gaze stern and commanding. From here, the staterooms unfold in a carefully choreographed sequence. The green drawing room, with its silk-covered walls and ceiling painted with scenes from classical mythology. The throne room, with its crimson canopy and ceremonial chairs. The picture gallery, that long corridor where some of the greatest paintings in the royal collection are displayed. Each room is designed to be more impressive than the last, building to a crescendo of gilt and marble and crystal. The economics of the royal collection deserve a moment's contemplation. The collection comprises more than 1 billion objects, paintings, sculptures, furniture, ceramics, jewels, manuscripts, and countless other items accumulated by British monarchs over more than 500 years. It is held in trust by the sovereign for their successors and the nation, which means it can never be sold or dispersed. The collection is literally priceless, in the sense that its value has never been and probably never could be calculated. Some individual pieces, however, have been valued for insurance purposes. Paintings by Rembrandt, Vermeer, Rubens and Canaletto hang on these walls, any one of which might fetch tens of millions of pounds at auction. The collection includes works that simply don't appear on the market, paintings so rare and so significant that their value is essentially theoretical. What would you pay for a unique Vermeer, for the only surviving painting by a particular master? The question has no answer because such objects are never offered for sale. George IV, for all his faults, was a passionate and knowledgeable collector. He purchased many of the finest works in the royal collection, often paying substantial sums that his critics considered wasteful. Yet those purchases have appreciated in value beyond anything he could have imagined. A painting he might have bought for a few £1,000s could be worth 50 million or more today. His extravagance in this sense proved to be an extraordinary investment, though that was surely not his motivation. You move through the guard room and into the spaces beyond, each step taking you deeper into the palace's heart. The light grows warmer as you progress, the chandeliers casting soft shadows on walls and ceilings. Servants have passed this way recently, you can tell. The candles are freshly lit, the flowers in their vases are dewy and fragrant, the mirrors have been polished until they reflect like still water. The transformation that Nash began and Bloor completed created a palace that could function on multiple levels simultaneously. The staterooms you're walking through now are designed for ceremony and display, for impressing foreign visitors and hosting grand occasions. But elsewhere in the building, hidden from public view, are the offices and workrooms that keep the machinery of monarchy running day by day. Correspondence is answered, schedules are managed, accounts are kept. The palace is not just a home or a symbol, but a functioning institution, with all the administrative complexity that implies. The cost of staffing such an operation is substantial. Hundreds of people work at Buckingham Palace, from senior courtiers who advise the monarch on matters of state, to housemaids who change the linens in guest bedrooms. There are chefs and gardeners, electricians and plumbers, security officers and communications specialists. Each of these roles comes with a salary, benefits, and the complications of employment in a unique and demanding environment. In the 19th century, when Queen Victoria established her household here, the palace employed even more staff than it does today. Footmen and housemaids were plentiful and cheap, and the elaborate rituals of Victorian domestic service required small armies of servants to function. A single meal might involve dozens of staff, from the cooks who prepared the food to the footmen who served it to the scullery maids who washed up afterward. The economics of service have changed dramatically since then, with labour costs rising and expectations of working conditions improving. But the fundamental reality remains the same. A building of this size and complexity requires constant attention from skilled workers, and those workers must be paid. The money comes from the sovereign grant, which in turn comes from the revenues of the Crown estate, a portfolio of property and investments that belongs to the monarch in their official capacity. It's a complicated arrangement with roots stretching back centuries, but the essential exchange is simple enough. The monarch surrenders the revenues of the Crown estate to the Treasury, and in return receives a grant to cover the costs of their official duties. In recent years, the Crown estate has generated revenues exceeding £300 million annually. The sovereign grant is set at a percentage of those revenues, currently 25%, though this rate was increased temporarily to fund the palace renovation programme. The mathematics suggest that the monarchy, in purely financial terms, returns more to the public purse than it costs. But economics is rarely that simple, and the true value or cost of the institution depends on factors that can't easily be quantified. You pause in a doorway, looking back at the rooms you've passed through. The palace feels different at this hour than it must during the day, when officials bustle through the corridors and the business of state fills every corner. Now there is only stillness, only the soft tick of unseen clocks and the gentle settling of an ancient building preparing for night. The gilt and marble gleam in the lamplight, patient and permanent, indifferent to the passing of years and the debates of politicians. Somewhere ahead of you, through doors you haven't yet opened, lies the suite of rooms where you'll sleep tonight. But there's no hurry. The palace has stood here for nearly 200 years and will stand for many more. The rooms will wait, the bed will be made, the fire laid, everything prepared for your comfort. For now, you simply stand and breathe and let the beauty of this place wash over you like warm water. The economics of transformation are never simple. What George IV spent so extravagantly, what Parliament complained about so bitterly, has become a treasure beyond calculation. The craftsmen who laboured here are dust, but their work endures. The politicians who counted the costs are forgotten, but the building they funded stands as a monument to an age of unparalleled ambition. Sometimes the things that seem most wasteful in the moment prove to be the wisest investments of all. You take a deep breath, feeling the particular air of the palace fill your lungs. It smells faintly of flowers and furniture polish, of old wood and clean linen. It's the smell of a place that has been cared for, generation after generation, by people who understood that they were custodians of something larger than themselves. And now, for one night, you are part of that story. The corridor stretches before you, golden and inviting, leading deeper into the palace. You begin to walk, your footsteps soft on the thick carpet, moving through rooms that have witnessed history and will witness history yet to come. The staterooms await, and beyond them the private apartments, and beyond those the quiet bedroom where you will finally lay your head to rest. But for now, You simply walk and breathe and let the palace enfold you in its ancient golden embrace. The staterooms open before you like chapters in a book, each one revealing new wonders while building upon what came before. You move through them slowly, giving yourself permission to linger, to notice details that might escape a hurried visitor. There is no tour guide here, no schedule to keep, no crowd pressing from behind. Tonight, these rooms belong to you alone, and you can take all the time in the world. The first of the great reception rooms you enter is the green drawing room, and you understand immediately how it earned its name. The walls are covered in silk of the most exquisite shade of green, somewhere between emerald and sage, a colour that seems to shift subtly as you move through the space. The silk was woven specifically for this room, its pattern incorporating delicate botanical motifs that echo the natural world beyond the palace windows. To commission such fabric today would cost a small fortune, but when this room was decorated, such extravagance was simply expected. The ceiling above you is a masterwork of decorative plasterwork, painted in soft tones of cream and gold with occasional touches of that signature green. Classical figures recline in painted clouds, their drapery flowing in an imaginary breeze. The technique is called trompe-l'œil, French for deceiving the eye, and it creates the illusion of depth and dimension on what is actually a flat surface. Craftsmen spent months on scaffolding to achieve this effect, applying layer after layer of paint with brushes so fine they contained only a few hairs each. Furniture is arranged throughout the room in conversational groupings, as if guests might arrive at any moment and settle into these chairs and sofas for quiet discussion. The pieces are French, mostly, acquired during the reign of George IV, who had a particular fondness for the elaborate style of the Ancien Régime. Many of these items were purchased at auction after the French Revolution, when the contents of aristocratic houses flooded the market. What was tragedy for the French nobility became opportunity for collectors across the Channel. The economics of the antique furniture market in the early 19th century were remarkable. Objects that had been created for French kings and queens, that had stood in the grandest palaces of Europe, were suddenly available to anyone with sufficient funds. George IV spent lavishly, acquiring pieces that would be virtually impossible to purchase today at any price. A single commode from the workshop of a master like Jean-Henri Riesner might have cost him several £1,000s. That same piece, if it ever came to market now, could fetch several million. You pause beside a cabinet of extraordinary beauty, its surface decorated with marquetry depicting flowers and musical instruments. The wood has been cut into thousands of tiny pieces, each one shaped and fitted with watchmaker's precision, then polished until the surface gleams like glass. The hours of skilled labour required to create such an object are almost impossible to calculate. In an age before power tools and precision machinery, everything had to be done by hand, by craftsmen who had trained for years to master their art. The fireplace in this room is another marvel, its mantel carved from a single piece of white marble, its surround decorated with gilt bronze ornaments depicting classical scenes. Above it hang a mirror that stretches nearly to the ceiling, its frame heavy with gilded acanthus leaves and cherubs. The mirror reflects the room back upon itself, doubling its apparent size and multiplying the light from the chandeliers until the whole space seems to shimmer. From the green drawing room, you pass through into the throne room, and here the atmosphere changes perceptibly. This is the ceremonial heart of the palace, the room where the symbolic power of the monarchy is most dramatically displayed. The colour scheme shifts from green to crimson, the shade of royalty, of state robes, of the benches in the House of Lords. It is a colour that speaks of blood and passion, of sacrifice and continuity, of a lineage that stretches back beyond memory. The thrones themselves stand at the far end of the room, beneath a canopy of crimson velvet embroidered with the royal coat of arms. They are not particularly comfortable-looking chairs, these thrones, but comfort is not their purpose. They exist to be seen, to anchor the rituals of state that have taken place in this room for nearly 200 years. Foreign ambassadors present their credentials here, standing before the sovereign in ceremonies that have changed little since Victoria's day. The room is lined with portraits of previous monarchs, their painted eyes gazing down from gilded frames. George III is here, the king who first purchased this site. George IV, who transformed a house into a palace. Victoria, who made it a home. Edward, George, Elizabeth, and all the others who have sat upon those thrones and received the homage of their subjects. The cumulative weight of history is almost palpable in this room, pressing down from the high ceiling like a physical force. Above the thrones, the letters VR are picked out in gilt, standing for Victoria Regina, Queen Victoria. She was the monarch who truly established the rituals and rhythms of palace life that continue to this day. When she ascended to the throne in 1837, at the age of just 18, Buckingham Palace was still unfinished and largely unused. She moved in 3 weeks after becoming queen, determined to make this her home despite its incomplete state. Victoria's relationship with money was complicated. She inherited a monarchy that was deeply unpopular, tainted by the excesses of her uncles and the scandals of their courts. She was determined to restore respectability to the crown, and part of that meant managing the royal finances with more care than her predecessors had shown. She and Prince Albert, whom she married in 1840, worked together to put the household on a more business-like footing, reducing unnecessary expenses and investing wisely. The result was that Victoria, despite maintaining the grandeur expected of a queen, actually accumulated a substantial personal fortune during her reign. She owned property, invested in stocks and bonds, and managed her money with a shrewdness that surprised those who knew her. When she died in 1901, after more than 63 years on the throne, her estate was valued at several £1,000,000, equivalent to hundreds of millions today. You move past the thrones and through another doorway, entering the picture gallery. This long corridor stretches for 155 feet, making it one of the largest rooms in the palace. The walls are lined with paintings from the royal collection, hung in the traditional manner with frames nearly touching, creating a tapestry of images that rewards close attention. The lighting here has been carefully designed to show the paintings to their best advantage. During the day, natural light floods through skylights in the ceiling, filtered and diffused to prevent damage to the delicate pigments. Now, in the evening, electric lights hidden behind screens provide a warm, even illumination that brings out the rich colours and subtle brushwork of these masterpieces. You begin to walk the length of the gallery, pausing before paintings that catch your eye. Here is a Rembrandt, a self-portrait of the artist in middle age, his face emerging from darkness with an expression of quiet contemplation. The painting is nearly 400 years old, yet Rembrandt's gaze seems as fresh and immediate as if he'd just set down his brush. What would this painting fetch at auction? £50 million? £100 million? The question is meaningless because it will never be sold, but the fact of its value hangs in the air like perfume. A few steps further, and you find yourself before a Vermeer. There are fewer than 40 authenticated Vermeers in the entire world, and the Royal Collection holds 3 of them. This one depicts a woman seated at a keyboard instrument, her face turned toward the viewer with an expression that might be invitation or indifference. The light in the painting seems to come from somewhere beyond the canvas, illuminating the scene with a clarity that feels almost supernatural. Vermeer's paintings rarely come to market, and when they do, they command extraordinary prices. In 1921, a Vermeer sold at auction for just over £100,000, a record at the time. In 2004, another Vermeer sold privately for an estimated $30 million. The trajectory of these prices tells a story about changing tastes, increasing wealth, and the growing scarcity of available masterworks. Each time a Vermeer enters a museum collection, there is one fewer that might ever be purchased. The Royal Collection acquired its Vermeers through different means at different times, but once acquired, they became part of a permanent holding that exists outside the normal art market entirely. They belong to the sovereign in trust, which means they cannot be sold to pay debts or fund projects or satisfy any personal whim. They are in effect removed from the economy altogether, their value frozen in a kind of perpetual stasis. This raises interesting questions about the nature of wealth and ownership. The Royal Collection is often described as priceless, and in a literal sense this is true. You cannot put a price on something that will never be priced, and yet the collection clearly has enormous value, represents an almost unimaginable accumulation of cultural capital. It's a paradox that economists find fascinating. Wealth that cannot be spent, assets that cannot be converted, treasure that exists purely for its own sake. You continue down the gallery, passing paintings by Rubens and Van Dyck, by Canaletto and Gainsborough. Each one tells a story, not just in its subject matter, but in how it came to be here. Some were commissioned directly by monarchs, portraits of themselves or their families intended to project power and legitimacy. Others were purchased by collectors with keen eyes and deep pockets, who recognized genius before the market did. Canaletto's views of Venice are particularly striking, their detail so precise that historians have used them to study the architecture of the city as it existed in the 18th century. George III owned many Canalettos, and his taste for them helped establish the artist's reputation in Britain. The paintings show Venice at the height of its beauty, before industrialization and mass tourism transformed it into something different. In a sense, they preserve a moment in time that would otherwise be lost. The economics of royal collecting in the Georgian era were shaped by factors that seem strange to modern eyes. There was no clear distinction between the monarch's personal wealth and the resources of the state. The king could spend public money on private pleasures with relatively little accountability, and what he purchased became, by default, part of the royal inheritance. This blurring of public and private continued until well into the 20th century, when reforms established clearer boundaries between the sovereign's personal property and the assets held in trust. At the far end of the gallery you pause before a window that looks out over the palace gardens. The glass is dark now, reflecting your own image back at you, but you can imagine the view in daylight. The vast lawn stretching toward the lake, the ancient trees framing carefully composed vistas, the unexpected wilderness in the heart of London. The gardens cover nearly 40 acres. making them the largest private garden in the city. Their value as real estate would be almost incalculable. Billions of pounds of prime London land held in perpetuity for royal use. You turn from the window and continue your progress through the staterooms. Each space flows into the next with the logic that becomes apparent only gradually. The architect who designed this sequence understood the psychology of ceremonial movement, how anticipation builds as visitors pass through increasingly grand spaces, how arrival at the final destination feels earned rather than given. The blue drawing room arrests your attention with its sheer audacity. The walls appear to be lined with columns of blue onyx, a rare and precious stone that would have cost a fortune even in small quantities. But appearances deceive. The columns are actually scagliola, a mixture of plite, marble dust, and pigments that can be polished to resemble any stone imaginable. It was a technique favoured by Italian craftsmen and imported to England for projects exactly like this one. The use of scagliola is a reminder that even the wealthiest patrons sometimes sought economies. Real onyx columns of this size would have been prohibitively expensive, perhaps impossible to source in sufficient quantities. The imitation achieves nearly the same visual effect at a fraction of the cost. It's a pragmatic compromise in a building that otherwise seems to acknowledge no limits. 30 of these fake columns line the room, their blue surfaces gleaming in the lamplight. The ceiling above is another tour de force of decorative painting, its central medallion depicting figures from classical mythology surrounded by borders of gilt and cream. The furniture is arranged in the French manner, chairs and sofas positioned to facilitate conversation, small tables placed within reach for refreshments. State functions in this room bring together some of the most powerful people in the world. Presidents and prime ministers, kings and queens, business leaders and cultural figures gather here for receptions before state banquets, making small talk while footmen circulate with trays of champagne. The economics of these events are substantial. A single state visit might cost several £100,000 when all expenses are tallied. But the diplomatic value, the soft power generated by such hospitality, is considered well worth the investment. From the blue drawing room you pass into the music room, a bow-shaped space that projects from the garden front of the palace. The curved walls create unique acoustics, making this an ideal venue for the musical performances that have been a feature of palace entertainment for generations. The decor here is slightly more restrained than in some of the other staterooms, allowing attention to focus on the music itself rather than competing with visual spectacle. A grand piano stands in the corner, its lid closed for the evening. The instrument is one of several in the palace, maintained in perfect condition by specialists who visit regularly to tune and adjust. The economics of musical instrument maintenance at this level are surprisingly complex. A single piano might require several £1,000s worth of attention each year to keep it concert ready. The music room has witnessed many significant moments in royal history. Several royal babies have been christened here, including the current heir to the throne. The room's association with ceremony and celebration gives it a particular warmth, a sense of accumulated joy that softens its formal grandeur. You can almost hear the echoes of music and laughter that have filled this space over the decades. The evening has grown deeper as you've wandered through these rooms, and you're beginning to feel the first gentle tugs of tiredness. The palace seems to sense this shift, the lights perhaps a little dimmer than they were, the silence a little more profound. The staterooms have shown you their treasures, revealed their secrets, offered their welcome. But there are more intimate spaces waiting, rooms where monarchs have retreated from public duty to find private rest. You take one last look around the music room, fixing its details in your memory. The curved walls, the careful proportions, the piano waiting patiently for fingers that won't come tonight. Then you turn toward the door that leads deeper into the palace, toward the private apartments where your own bed awaits. The staterooms recede behind you, their golden light fading as you pass into quieter corridors. The value of what you've seen tonight is beyond calculation. Not just the monetary value, though that alone would be staggering, but the cultural value, the historical value, the simple human value of beauty, created and preserved across centuries. These rooms exist as testament to what skilled hands and ambitious minds can achieve when given resources and time. They are a gift from the past to the present, held in trust for a future that is always arriving. And now, as the palace settles into its nighttime quiet, you carry that gift with you into the softer, more private spaces ahead. The formal tour is complete. What comes next is something more personal, more intimate, more suited to the peaceful purpose of this evening. You're not just a visitor now, you're a guest, welcomed into the inner life of a building that rarely reveals itself so fully. Your footsteps slow as you leave the staterooms behind. The carpet beneath your feet seems thicker, the walls closer, the ceiling lower. The scale of the palace is shifting around you, becoming more human, more domestic, more conducive to rest. Somewhere ahead, a bed is waiting with fresh linens and plump pillows. Somewhere ahead, sleep is gathering like clouds before gentle rain. But there is no hurry. The night stretches before you, unhurried and welcoming. The palace will keep you safe until morning. The corridor you enter now feels different from what came before. The ceilings are lower, the proportions more intimate, the decoration somehow softer. You have crossed an invisible threshold, leaving behind the public grandeur of the staterooms and entering the private world where generations of monarchs have actually lived their daily lives. This is the north wing of the palace, where the royal family's private apartments are located, and where honoured guests are accommodated in suites of quiet luxury. The transition is subtle but unmistakable. The gilt is still present, the quality of craftsmanship still evident in every detail, but the atmosphere has changed from performance to comfort. These corridors were not designed to impress visiting dignitaries or awe foreign ambassadors. They were designed for people to walk through on their way to breakfast, to pass by in dressing gowns late at night, to move through without ceremony or fanfare. There is something almost domestic about the scale, despite the undeniable opulence. Photographs line the walls here. Not the formal portraits of the staterooms, but family pictures in silver frames. You catch glimpses of faces you recognize from newspapers and television, but in private moments. Garden parties, Christmas gatherings, children playing with dogs on lawns. These images remind you that behind the public ritual of monarchy, there are simply people living their lives, celebrating birthdays and mourning losses, experiencing joy and sorrow like anyone else. Queen Victoria was the first monarch to actually live in Buckingham Palace, and she did so against considerable odds. When she moved in during the summer of 1837, just 3 weeks after ascending to the throne at the age of 18, the building was still incomplete and plagued with problems. The drains were faulty, the ventilation inadequate, and many of the rooms were still unfurnished. But Victoria was determined. She wanted to establish herself in her own household, free from the influence of her mother and the comptroller who had dominated her childhood. Those first years in the palace were lonely ones for the young queen. She was not yet married, had few close friends, and carried the enormous weight of constitutional responsibility on her slender shoulders. But she applied herself to her duties with remarkable dedication, establishing routines and protocols that would shape palace life for decades to come. She rose early, worked at her correspondence for hours each day, and held audiences with ministers and officials in these very rooms. Everything changed when she married Prince Albert of Saxe, Coburg and Gotha in February of 1840. Albert was serious, scholarly, and genuinely devoted to Victoria. He was also practical and organised, with a keen interest in efficiency and modern management. Together they transformed the chaotic royal household into something approaching a well-run institution. Albert's reforms extended to every aspect of palace life, including its finances. He discovered that the different departments of the household operated independently, with little coordination and much waste. The Lord Steward's department handled the dining rooms. The Lord Chamberlain's department handled the bedrooms. The result was absurd inefficiencies. One department might lay a fire in a room, but another department was responsible for lighting it. Albert streamlined these arrangements, eliminating duplication and establishing clearer lines of authority. The savings were significant. By some estimates, Albert's reforms reduced household expenses by several £1,000s per year, while actually improving the quality of service. The money saved was invested wisely, contributing to the personal fortune that Victoria would accumulate over her long reign. Albert's approach to royal finances was ahead of its time, anticipating the professionalisation that would eventually transform the monarchy in the 20th century. You pause before a door that stands slightly ajar, revealing a sitting room decorated in soft blues and creams. This is the kind of space where Victoria and Albert would have spent their evenings together, reading aloud, playing music, discussing the events of the day. Albert had a particular fondness for art and science, and he filled their private rooms with books and instruments, paintings and curiosities. Victoria shared these interests, or learned to share them, and their marriage was by all accounts a genuine partnership of minds as well as hearts. Their domestic happiness was remarkable given the pressure of their position. They had 9 children in the space of 17 years, each pregnancy adding to Victoria's responsibilities while temporarily removing her from active public life. The children were raised in these private apartments, their nurseries and schoolrooms tucked away from the staterooms, their lives shaped by both extraordinary privilege and careful discipline. The economics of raising a royal family in the 19th century were substantial. Each child required nurses, governesses, tutors, and eventually their own households as they grew. The princes were educated for military and naval careers. The princesses prepared for marriage into European royal houses. Clothing, education, travel, and entertainment all added to the expenses. But Victoria and Albert were determined that their children should not grow up spoiled or frivolous, and they enforced a relatively simple standard of living by royal standards. You continue down the corridor, your footsteps silent on carpet that seems to absorb all sound. The palace at this hour feels almost suspended in time, as if the ordinary rules of passing minutes and hours have been temporarily set aside. The photographs on the walls blur as you pass, faces merging into a continuous stream of royal imagery stretching back generations. Albert died in December of 1861, at the age of just 42. The cause was probably typhoid fever, though some historians have suggested other possibilities. His death devastated Victoria, who entered a period of mourning so profound and prolonged that it alarmed her ministers and alienated much of the public. She withdrew from London, spending most of her time at Windsor Castle or Balmoral in Scotland, and she refused to appear at public ceremonies or open Parliament in person. Buckingham Palace entered a kind of hibernation during Victoria's widowhood. The staterooms were closed, the private apartments shrouded in gloom. Victoria kept Albert's rooms exactly as he had left them, his clothes laid out each morning, his shaving water brought to his washstand. This behaviour, which we might now recognise as complicated grief, continued for years, and gave rise to criticism that the Queen was neglecting her duties. The economics of this withdrawal were complicated. On one hand, Victoria's absence from London reduced the costs of entertaining and ceremony. On the other hand, her unpopularity threatened the institution of monarchy itself. Republicans gained strength, arguing that if the Queen would not perform her public functions, the nation had no need of her. Victoria was eventually persuaded to resume some public duties, but she never fully returned to the active engagement of her early reign. The corridor opens into a small antechamber, and you pause to admire a painting that hangs above a marble-topped console. It shows a young woman in a white dress, her expression serene, her pose relaxed. Something about the composition suggests this might be a private commission rather than a formal state portrait, an image made for family pleasure rather than public display. From this antechamber, several doors lead to different parts of the private apartments. One leads to the rooms that were once used by the monarch's private secretary, the official who manages the sovereign's correspondence and coordinates their public engagements. Another leads to sitting rooms and studies, the working spaces of a monarch's daily life. And a third leads deeper into the guest accommodation, toward the Belgian suite where you will spend the night. The private secretary's role is crucial to the functioning of the modern monarchy. This official serves as a link between the sovereign and the government, ensuring that the monarch is kept informed of political developments and that their constitutional duties are properly discharged. The position has existed in various forms for more than a century, and the men and women who have held it have wielded considerable influence behind the scenes. The economics of the private office are modest compared to the grand expenditures of state ceremony, but they are essential to the institution's smooth operation. A small team of officials manages the monarch's diary, handles correspondence from the public, and coordinates the logistics of royal engagements. Their salaries are paid from the sovereign grant, and their work continues quietly behind the scenes while the public sees only the visible tip of royal activity. You move toward the door that leads to the guest apartments, your anticipation building. The Belgian suite awaits, named for King Leopold I of Belgium, who was Queen Victoria's uncle and a frequent visitor to the palace in its early years. Leopold had been instrumental in arranging Victoria's marriage to Albert, and the close ties between the British and Belgian royal houses were reflected in the naming of these apartments. But before you reach your destination, you pass through another sitting room, and here you pause again. The room is furnished with pieces from the early Victorian period, their curves and flourishes characteristic of the style that was fashionable in the 1840s and 50s. A writing desk stands near the window, its leather surface worn smooth by generations of use. You can imagine Victoria herself sitting here, working through her endless correspondence, her small hand moving quickly across page after page. Victoria was a prolific writer. She kept a detailed journal throughout her life, filling more than 120 volumes with her observations and reflections. She wrote thousands of letters to her children, her ministers, her fellow monarchs, and she conducted official business with a dedication that put many professional administrators to shame. The economics of royal correspondence in the Victorian era were simpler than today. Paper, ink, sealing wax, and the time of secretaries who copied and filed each document. But the volume was immense, and the hours Victoria devoted to it were a form of labour that went largely unrecognised. The sitting room connects to another corridor, and this one feels different again. The decoration is slightly more modern here, the photographs on the walls showing faces from the 20th century rather than the 19th. You have moved forward in time, passing through layers of history like geological strata, each era leaving its mark on the rooms it inhabited. Edward VII, who succeeded Victoria in 1901, transformed the atmosphere of Buckingham Palace almost overnight. Where Victoria had been reclusive and mournful, Edward was sociable and pleasure-loving. He reopened the staterooms, hosted glittering entertainments, and brought the palace back to life as a centre of social activity. The contrast with his mother's reign could hardly have been more complete. Edward's approach to money was equally different from Victoria's careful management. He had spent his years as Prince of Wales accumulating debts through gambling, entertaining, and maintaining expensive establishments. His tastes ran to fine food, beautiful women, and all the luxuries that wealth could provide. As king, he continued to live extravagantly, though he was now better able to support his lifestyle through the resources of the crown. The private apartments during Edward's reign were venues for a more relaxed kind of entertaining. The king would host small dinner parties for his closest friends, evenings of cards and conversation that stretched late into the night. The atmosphere was warmer, more convivial, less formal than under Victoria. Edward genuinely enjoyed company and had a gift for making guests feel welcome. You pass through a doorway and find yourself in another sitting room, this one decorated in the style of the early 20th century. The colours are lighter here, the furniture less massive, the overall effect more modern. A gramophone stands in one corner, a reminder of the technological changes that transformed entertainment during this period. Electric lights have fully replaced gas by now, and central heating has begun to supplement the open fires that still burn in marble grates. George V, who succeeded Edward in 1910, brought a different sensibility again. Where Edward had been flamboyant, George was steady and dutiful. He had never expected to become king, being the second son, but his older brother's death in 1892 changed his destiny. George approached his role with a seriousness that bordered on anxiety, determined to do his duty even if he lacked his father's natural ease. The First World War transformed both the country and the monarchy. George V renounced his German titles and changed the family name from Saxe-Coburg-Gotha to Windsor, a symbolic break with Britain's enemies that resonated with the public. The palace itself was affected by wartime austerity. Economies were made in household expenditure, entertainments were curtailed, and the royal family publicly shared in the sacrifices being asked of ordinary citizens. This democratic gesture was important to the monarchy's survival. In an age of revolution, when royal houses across Europe were being overthrown, the British monarchy adapted and endured. By identifying with national suffering rather than appearing aloof from it, George V helped secure the institution's legitimacy for another generation. The economics of shared sacrifice, however symbolic, proved to be a wise investment in public goodwill. You are very close to the Belgian suite now, close to the room where you will finally rest. But the journey through the private apartments has been a journey through time as well as space, and you carry the accumulated weight of all these histories with you. Victoria's grief and dedication, Edward's sociability and extravagance, George's duty and determination. All of them lived in these rooms, walked these corridors, found what comfort they could in the private spaces of an impossibly public life. One more doorway stands before you, and beyond it, at last, the suite that will be yours for the night. You pause on the threshold, taking a breath, preparing yourself for the transition from wandering to rest. The palace has shown you so much already, revealed so many layers of its long story, but the deepest comfort, the most profound peace, still lies ahead. You reach for the door handle, cool brass beneath your fingers. The mechanism turns smoothly, silently, as befitting a palace where every detail has been attended to by skilled hands. The door swings open, and warm light spills out into the corridor, inviting you forward into the room beyond. The Belgian suite awaits. Your bed for the night is made, your rest is prepared, and the long story of this evening is approaching its most intimate chapter. You step across the threshold, leaving the corridor behind, entering at last the space where sleep will finally find you. The room that opens before you is everything a royal guest chamber should be, and something more besides. It has a quality of welcoming that transcends mere luxury, a sense that generations of care have been devoted to making this space a sanctuary for weary travellers from every corner of the world. You step inside and feel the door close softly behind you, and for a moment you simply stand and breathe, allowing the room to reveal itself to you. The Belgian suite takes its name from King Leopold, the first of Belgium, Queen Victoria's beloved uncle, who was a frequent and honoured guest at the palace in its early years. Leopold was more than just a visiting relative. He had been a mentor to the young Victoria, offering guidance and support during the difficult years of her youth, and his visits were occasions of genuine affection rather than mere diplomatic formality. When Victoria designated these apartments for his use, she was honouring a relationship that had shaped her life. The suite has evolved over the decades since Leopold's time, updated and refreshed by successive generations while retaining its essential character. What you see now reflects the tastes of many hands, a layering of choices that somehow coheres into a harmonious whole. The walls are papered in a soft shade of cream, their surface broken by mouldings picked out in white and the palest gold. The ceiling is high but not overwhelming, its plasterwork elegant without being ostentatious. At the centre of the room stands the bed, and your eyes are drawn to it inevitably. It is a four-poster of substantial proportions, its frame carved from dark wood and hung with curtains of heavy silk. The fabric is a deep shade of blue, almost navy, that seems to absorb the light and hold it, creating a sense of enclosed privacy within the larger space. The curtains are tied back at the moment, revealing crisp white linens and pillows that seem almost impossibly inviting. You move toward the bed slowly, taking in the details of the room as you go. A fireplace occupies one wall, its grate laid with kindling and logs ready to be lit should the evening turn cold. The mantelpiece above is marble, its surface holding a clock and a pair of candlesticks in silver that gleam softly in the lamplight. The clock is ticking, its sound so quiet you only notice it when you listen deliberately, a gentle pulse marking time in this timeless space. The windows are tall and draped in curtains that match those on the bed, their folds heavy with years of careful maintenance. During the day, these windows would look out over the palace gardens, that vast expanse of green in the heart of London. Now they are dark mirrors, reflecting the room back upon itself, doubling the soft light and creating an illusion of infinite depth. A writing desk stands near one window, its surface clear except for a leather blotter and a set of stationery embossed with the royal cipher. You imagine the letters that might have been written at this desk, the communications between heads of state that shaped the course of history. Presidents and prime ministers have sat here, composing thoughts that would later be archived and studied by historians. The economics of diplomatic correspondence are difficult to quantify, but the value of relationships built through such exchanges is immeasurable. Near the desk, a comfortable armchair is positioned to catch whatever light the windows provide. The upholstery is a tasteful pattern of cream and gold, echoing the colours of the walls. A small table beside the chair holds a reading lamp and a selection of books, their spines suggesting a range of interest from history to fiction. Someone has anticipated the varied tastes of guests who might spend an evening here before retiring. The guest list for this suite reads like a history of the 20th and 21st centuries. Heads of state from every continent have slept in this bed, leaders whose decisions shape the lives of billions. Presidents of the United States have laid their heads on these pillows, from Woodrow Wilson to Barack Obama. European monarchs, Asian emperors, African presidents, and leaders from nations that did not exist when these rooms were first decorated have all been welcomed here. The economics of hosting such guests are substantial but carefully managed. A state visit to Britain typically involves several days of ceremony and diplomacy, with every detail planned months in advance. The cost of security alone runs into the hundreds of thousands of pounds, with officers stationed throughout the palace and grounds for the duration of the visit. Food, flowers, entertainment and transportation all add to the expense, creating a total that can approach £500,000 for a single visit. But the return on this investment is considered well worth the expenditure. State visits strengthen diplomatic relationships, facilitate trade agreements, and project British influence abroad. The soft power generated by hospitality of this calibre is difficult to measure, but easy to observe. Guests who have been treated with such care and attention often become friends and allies, their positive experiences translating into goodwill that benefits both nations for years to come. You sit on the edge of the bed, feeling the mattress yield beneath your weight. The quality is immediately apparent, the support firm but forgiving, the surface smooth and cool against your hands. Royal households have always been particular about bedding, understanding that sleep is essential to health, and that leaders who sleep poorly make poor decisions. The linens on this bed are of the finest Egyptian cotton, their thread count so high the fabric feels almost like silk. The history of luxury bedding is surprisingly interesting. Cotton from Egypt has been prized for centuries for its long fibres, which can be spun into threads of exceptional fineness and strength. The economics of the cotton trade shaped colonial relationships and fueled industrial revolutions, connecting this comfortable bed to vast networks of global commerce. The sheets beneath your hand represent the labour of farmers, spinners, weavers, and seamstresses across multiple continents. A bathroom adjoins the bedroom, visible through a door left slightly open. You catch a glimpse of marble surfaces and polished brass fittings, of towels stacked in precise arrangements, and small bottles of toiletries lined up like soldiers, awaiting inspection. The bathroom has been modernised over the years, of course, its Victorian plumbing replaced with contemporary fixtures that function silently and efficiently. But the aesthetic remains classical, honouring the suite's heritage while accommodating modern expectations. The cost of maintaining bathrooms in a building of this age and grandeur is considerable. Pipes that have served for decades must be monitored and eventually replaced. Fixtures that were state-of-the-art in one generation become inefficient relics in the next. The palace's recent renovation programme allocated significant funds to updating the water and waste systems, work that is invisible to guests but essential to the building's continued function. You rise from the bed and walk slowly around the room, examining the artwork that decorates the walls. A landscape hangs above the fireplace, depicting a pastoral scene that might be the English countryside or might be somewhere in Belgium, a subtle nod to the suite's namesake. The brushwork is confident, the colours harmonious, the overall effect one of tranquil beauty. This is not a showpiece from the main royal collection, but a more intimate work, chosen for its ability to soothe rather than impress. Smaller paintings and prints fill the remaining wall space, their subjects ranging from botanical studies to architectural views. Someone with a careful eye has curated this collection, understanding that guests in this room will spend time looking at these images and should find them consistently pleasing. The economics of such curation are modest compared to the acquisition of major masterworks, but the attention to detail reflects the same commitment to excellence that characterises the palace as a whole. A wardrobe stands against one wall, its doors closed but its purpose obvious. Inside you would find hangers and shelves, space for the luggage that visiting dignitaries bring with them. A discreet pressing service is available for guests who require it, their clothing refreshed and returned without the guest ever seeing the staff who perform this service. The invisible labour of hospitality is constant in a place like this. Workers moving through hidden corridors and service areas to ensure that guests experience only seamless comfort. The economics of palace staffing have changed dramatically since Victoria's era. In the 19th century, servants were plentiful and cheap, their labour taken for granted by those they served. A single aristocratic household might employ dozens of people, from senior officials to the humblest scullery maid. The hierarchy was rigid and the hours were long, but employment in a royal household carried prestige that compensated for modest wages. Today, palace staff are professional employees with contracts, benefits, and legal protections their Victorian predecessors could not have imagined. They are paid competitive salaries, though perhaps not as high as they might earn in the private sector, and many consider the unique experience of working in a royal environment to be compensation in itself. The modern household is smaller and more efficient than its Victorian ancestor, but the commitment to service remains unchanged. As you continue your circuit of the room, you notice a small refrigerator discreetly positioned in one corner, stocked with beverages and light refreshments. The technology is modern, but the impulse behind it is ancient. The desire to ensure that guests want for nothing during their stay. A kettle and a selection of teas sit nearby, allowing you to prepare a comforting cup without having to summon assistance. The balance between service and privacy is carefully struck, offering help without intrusion. The evening has grown late as you've explored this beautiful room, and you're becoming aware of a deepening tiredness that calls you toward the bed. But there is no rush. The night stretches before you, unhurried and welcoming. The palace has no checkout time, no schedule to keep. You are free to sit by the fire if you wish, or to stand at the window imagining the gardens below, or to simply lie on the bed and let your thoughts drift where they will. You return to the bed and begin the gentle ritual of preparing for sleep. The covers turn back easily, revealing sheets that are somehow both crisp and soft, their surface cool and inviting. You slip between them and feel the weight of the blankets settle over you, a comforting pressure that seems to hold you safely in place. The pillows yield as you adjust your head, finding the perfect position with remarkable ease. From this vantage point, lying in the bed where so many consequential people have rested, the room takes on a different character. The ceiling seems higher, the shadows deeper, the lamplight warmer. You're looking up at the same view that presidents and prime ministers have seen, the same moulded plaster, the same gentle play of light and shadow. There is something both humbling and elevating about this thought, a reminder that we are all equal in our need for sleep, our vulnerability when we close our eyes. The bed curtains tied back at the posts frame your vision like the proscenium of a theatre. You could release them if you wished, creating a cocoon of deep blue fabric that would block out everything except the enclosed space of the bed itself. Generations of sleepers have done exactly that, drawing the curtains against drafts and light, creating a private refuge within the larger room. The psychology of such enclosure is powerful, triggering ancient instincts for safety and concealment. But for now, you leave the curtains tied. The room is warm enough, the light dim enough, and you find yourself wanting to remain connected to the space around you, rather than withdrawing completely. The fire in the grate has not been lit, but you can imagine the gentle crackle it would make, the dancing light it would cast on the walls. Perhaps on a winter night you would ask for it to be kindled, watching the flames as you drifted towards sleep. The clock on the mantelpiece continues its quiet measurement of time, each tick a tiny punctuation mark in the silence. You notice that you're breathing more slowly now, your body responding to the comfort of the bed and the peace of the room. The tensions of the day, whatever they might have been, are dissolving like morning mist, replaced by a spreading calm that starts at your extremities and moves gradually toward your center. This is what the best hospitality provides, not just physical comfort but psychological safety. The knowledge that you're being cared for, that someone has anticipated your needs and prepared for your arrival, allows the mind to release its constant vigilance. In a world that often demands alertness and anxiety, a space like this offers permission to let go, to trust, to rest. The suite has served this purpose for more than a century and a half, offering refuge to those who carry the heaviest responsibilities. The decisions made by people who slept in this bed have affected millions of lives, shaped the course of nations, altered the trajectory of history. And yet here, in this quiet room, those decision makers were simply human beings in need of rest, closing their eyes and surrendering to the same unconsciousness that claims us all. You feel your eyelids growing heavy, the room beginning to soften at its edges. The details that were so crisp when you entered are becoming gentler now, blurred by the approach of sleep. The paintings on the walls are smudges of colour, the furniture mere shapes in the dimming light. Only the bed remains fully present, its embrace becoming more complete with each passing moment. Somewhere in the palace, staff are going about their evening routines, preparing for the night ahead. Night porters take up their positions, ready to respond to any need that might arise. Security personnel monitor cameras and patrol grounds, their vigilance allowing guests to sleep undisturbed. The machinery of hospitality never fully stops, but it operates so quietly that guests rarely notice it at all. You are one of those guests now, held in the palm of an institution that has been perfecting the art of welcome for generations. The bed beneath you is more than furniture. It is a promise kept, a tradition honoured, a gift given without expectation of return. All that is asked of you is that you accept it, that you rest well, that you allow yourself to be cared for. The night deepens around you, the silence growing richer and more complete. You're falling asleep in Buckingham Palace, in a room where history has rested its head, where the powerful have found peace, where the world has paused and been still. Your breathing slows further, your thoughts beginning to fragment and drift. The Belgian suite holds you gently, as it has held so many before. The bed is perfect, the room is perfect, and the night is exactly as long as it needs to be. There is nothing to do now but let go, to trust in the comfort that surrounds you, to surrender to the sleep that is already claiming you. Your eyes close, and the room dissolves into warm darkness. You are safe here, held here, welcomed here. The palace wraps around you like a blanket woven from centuries of care, and sleep, gentle sleep, begins. The palace at night has a voice of its own, not a loud voice, nothing that would disturb a sleeper, but a gentle whisper of sounds that have accumulated over nearly 2 centuries of habitation. As you lie in the Belgian suite, drifting between waking and sleep, these sounds reach you softly, each one a small reminder that you are part of something larger than yourself, held within walls that have sheltered countless dreams. The most prominent sound, if you listen for it, is the ticking of clocks. The palace contains more than 350 timepieces scattered throughout its 775 rooms. Some are grand affairs standing in staterooms with gilded cases and elaborate faces. Others are modest, functional things, placed in offices and corridors to help staff keep their schedules. Together they form a symphony of tiny mechanical heartbeats, each one slightly different from its neighbours, their rhythms overlapping and interweaving in patterns too complex to follow. The maintenance of these clocks falls to a single individual, the royal horologist, a position that has existed in various forms for centuries. This specialist visits the palace regularly, winding mechanisms and adjusting pendulums, replacing worn parts and cleaning accumulated dust. The work requires extraordinary patience and precision, along with an encyclopedic knowledge of clockwork spanning several hundred years of design evolution. It is one of the most unusual jobs in Britain, perhaps in the world, and the economics of such specialised employment are modest but secure. Twice a year, when the clocks change for daylight saving time, the horologist faces a particular challenge. Every clock in the palace must be adjusted, a task that takes approximately 40 hours to complete. The work begins in the small hours of the appointed night and continues through the following day, with the horologist moving methodically from room to room, ensuring that the palace's temporal landscape shifts in unison. It is a reminder of how much effort goes into maintaining even the smallest details of this complex institution. As you lie in bed, you become aware of other sounds beneath the ticking. The building itself seems to breathe, settling into its nighttime posture with sighs and creaks that speak of age and weight. Floorboards contract as the air cools, releasing tiny snaps that echo briefly and then disappear. Somewhere far away, a pipe gurgles softly as water moves through the palace's ancient plumbing system, a sound so faint you might imagine you dreamed it. These are the sounds of a building that has stood for nearly 200 years, weathering storms and sieges, celebrations and mournings, the daily traffic of thousands of feet. The palace was built to last, its walls thick and solid, its foundations deep in the London clay. But no building stands forever without care, and the sounds you hear, the sounds of ongoing existence, of a structure that lives and changes even as it endures. The heating system contributes its own voice to the nocturnal chorus. Modern radiators have replaced many of the original fireplaces, their warmth distributed through pipes that run behind walls and beneath floors. The system operates quietly, but if you listen carefully, you can detect the occasional click of a thermostat adjusting, the gentle rush of warm water through metal channels. The economics of heating a building this size are substantial, with energy costs running into the hundreds of thousands of pounds each year, even with modern efficiency measures in place. The palace's recent renovation programme addressed many issues related to heating and energy use. Insulation was improved where possible without damaging historic fabric. New boilers were installed to replace equipment that had been in service for more than 30 years. The goal was not just to reduce costs, but to improve reliability, ensuring that the palace could continue to function regardless of weather or equipment failures. The investment was significant, but the alternative was risking catastrophic breakdowns that could have been far more expensive to address. Beyond the mechanical sounds, you become aware of something else: the quality of silence itself. London is one of the world's great cities, home to nearly 9 million people, its streets rarely truly quiet even in the depths of night. And yet here, within the thick walls of the palace, that urban bustle is reduced to the faintest possible murmur. You can sense its presence at the edges of perception, like a distant ocean, but it does not intrude. The palace creates its own pocket of tranquility, a sanctuary within the storm. This acoustic isolation is no accident. The walls of the palace are extraordinarily thick, built in an age when mass was the primary defence against noise, weather, and unwanted visitors. The windows are double glazed now, a modern addition that further reduces sound transmission. And the grounds themselves provide a buffer, nearly 40 acres of gardens separating the building from the nearest streets. The economics of urban real estate make this buffer almost impossibly valuable, but its worth cannot be measured only in money. Its true value is in the peace it provides. The guards outside maintain their positions through the night, their presence a reassurance rather than a disturbance. The changing of the guard, that famous ceremony that draws tourists from around the world, takes place during daylight hours, a spectacle of red tunics and bearskin caps, of shouted commands and precise footwork. But at night, the guardsmen are quieter, their vigilance no less keen but their manner more subdued. They stand at their posts in the darkness, watching over the palace and its sleeping occupants. The cost of royal security has increased dramatically in recent decades, Driven by changing threat assessments and evolving security technologies, the Metropolitan Police provides armoured officers who patrol the grounds and monitor surveillance systems. The military guards, members of regiments with centuries of history, continue their traditional role while coordinating with modern security protocols. The total expense runs into many millions of pounds each year, a significant portion of the budget for royal protection. This investment in security allows those within the palace to sleep peacefully, knowing they are protected by some of the most highly trained professionals in the world. The sound of their footsteps, if you could hear them, would be reassuring rather than alarming, evidence that watchful eyes are keeping danger at bay. But in fact, you cannot hear them at all. The guards move silently, professionals who understand that their effectiveness depends partly on remaining unobtrusive. As you drift deeper into the territory between waking and sleep, the sounds of the palace begin to blend and blur. The ticking of clocks becomes indistinguishable from the settling of walls, the whisper of heating from the distant murmur of the city. They merge into a continuous texture of sound, not quite silence, but something close to it, a blanket of white noise that cushions your descent into unconsciousness. The palace has witnessed countless nights like this one, nights when monarchs and their guests have lain in beds throughout the building, surrendering to sleep while the great house kept watch around them. Queen Victoria slept here for more than 60 years, her nights marked by dreams we can only imagine. Edward VII brought his own rhythms to the palace, retiring late after evenings of entertainment and rising when it suited him. George V and his queen maintained stricter schedules, their nights disciplined extensions of their dutiful days. During the Second World War, King George VI and Queen Elizabeth chose to remain in London despite the danger of German bombing. The palace was struck 9 times during the conflict, including one direct hit on the quadrangle that destroyed the chapel and came perilously close to killing the king and queen. Yet they stayed, sharing the risks faced by ordinary Londoners, and their nights must have been filled with anxiety as they listened for the sound of approaching aircraft and the whistle of falling bombs. The Queen Mother, as Elizabeth became known after her husband's death, later said that the bombing of the palace allowed her to look the East End in the face. Those working-class neighbourhoods suffered terribly during the Blitz, and there had been resentment that the royal family might escape to safety while their subjects endured. By staying, by accepting the same dangers, the king and queen earned a loyalty that lasted for generations. The economics of this decision cannot be calculated, but its value to the monarchy was immeasurable. The night sounds of the palace during the war years would have been very different from what you hear now. Air raid sirens, the drone of aircraft engines, the thump and crash of explosions near and far. Sleep would have been interrupted, fragmentary, haunted by the knowledge that each night might be the last, and yet people did sleep because the body demands it, because survival requires rest, because even in the darkest times there are moments of peace. You are fortunate to lie here in peacetime, in a palace that has not faced direct threat for more than 80 years. The sounds that reach you are gentle sounds, sounds of maintenance and vigilance rather than danger and destruction. The greatest risk you face tonight is perhaps oversleeping, missing the pale light of dawn as it filters through the curtains of the Belgian suite. The night staff move through the palace on soft feet, attending to tasks that cannot wait until morning. A night porter sits at a desk somewhere, ready to respond to any request from any of the building's occupants. Security personnel monitor banks of screens showing feeds from cameras throughout the grounds. In the kitchens, perhaps, a single light burns where someone prepares for tomorrow's breakfast, beginning work in the small hours so that everything will be ready when the household wakes. The economics of around-the-clock staffing are significant but necessary for an institution of this scale and importance. Night workers receive premium pay for their unsociable hours, compensation for the disruption to their sleep patterns and social lives. The palace has operated continuously for nearly 2 centuries, its functions never fully pausing even for holidays or emergencies. Someone is always awake, always watching, always ready. This constant vigilance creates a curious paradox. The palace is simultaneously one of the most watched places on earth and one of the most private. Cameras record every approach to the building, every movement in the corridors, every delivery at the service entrances, and yet within the private apartments, within this very room, you're invisible to all observation. The staff who monitor the security systems respect the privacy of guests, turning their attention away from spaces where intimacy is expected. The economics of privacy in an age of surveillance are complex, but here at least, the balance has been carefully struck. You sink deeper into the bed, feeling its support adjust to your body, cradling you in comfort that seems almost alive. The pillow beneath your head has moulded itself to your shape, providing exactly the support your neck requires. The blankets have settled into a cocoon, their weight evenly distributed, their warmth perfectly calibrated. Everything conspires to ease your passage into sleep. The sounds of the palace continue their gentle accompaniment, so quiet now that you're not sure whether you're hearing them or imagining them. A clock somewhere chimes the hour, but the tone is so soft, so distant, that it barely registers. You feel its vibration more than hear it, a tremor in the air that passes through you like a blessing. Outside the windows, the gardens lie in darkness. The lake reflects whatever light the sky provides, a mirror turned toward the clouds. The flamingos that live near the water are asleep now, their pink forms tucked into stillness. Their presence a surreal detail in this most English of settings. They have lived at the palace for decades, descendants of birds given as gifts, an eccentric tradition that continues simply because it has always continued. The trees in the garden are ancient, some of them planted when the palace was still a house, before Victoria was born, before the modern world took shape. They have witnessed everything that has happened here, silent observers whose rings record the passing years. On windy nights, their branches sway and creak, adding their voices to the palace's nocturnal song. Tonight, they are still, the air calm, the garden holding its breath along with you. The sounds grow fainter as you descend towards sleep, diminishing not because they have stopped, but because your awareness of them is fading. The ticking clocks, the settling walls, the distant hum of the city, all of it receding into the background, replaced by the rhythm of your own breathing, the beat of your own heart. You're becoming part of the palace now, your presence added to the countless presences that have rested here before. Your breath mingles with the air that royalty has breathed. Your dreams will join the dreams that have accumulated in these rooms over generations. The palace accepts you, absorbs you, holds you in its ancient embrace. The last sound you hear, or think you hear, is something that might be wind or might be whisper, might be the house itself settling into sleep alongside you. It carries no meaning, makes no demand, offers no disturbance. It is simply the voice of the night, speaking its wordless language, welcoming you into the country of dreams. Your breathing slows to match the rhythm of the clocks, each exhale a small surrender, each inhale a gentle renewal. The sounds of the palace fade to nothing, replaced by the deeper silence of approaching sleep. And in that silence, held and safe and warm, you let go completely. In the depths of sleep, time becomes strange. Minutes stretch into hours, hours collapse into moments, and the boundary between memory and imagination grows thin as morning mist. As you rest in the Belgian suite, your dreaming mind begins to wander through the palace, not as it is now, but as it has been, drifting through the lives of those who call this place home across the long span of years. Victoria comes to you first, perhaps because her presence is strongest here, her spirit most deeply woven into the fabric of these walls. You see her as a young woman, barely 18, ascending the throne in a country that did not quite know what to make of her. She was small in stature, barely 5 feet tall, but possessed of a determination that would carry her through more than 6 decades of rule. Her first night in the palace must have been overwhelming, the vast empty rooms echoing with the footsteps of servants, the weight of her new responsibilities pressing down like a physical burden. In your dream, you walk beside her through corridors that are both familiar and strange. The gaslight flickers, casting shadows that dance on walls not yet hung with the photographs that would accumulate over her long reign. She's alone in a way that queens rarely are, having dismissed her attendants for the night, wanting a moment of solitude in which to comprehend what has happened to her. She was not supposed to be queen. So many had stood between her and the throne, but one by one they had fallen away, and now here she is, the most powerful woman in the world, and utterly alone. Victoria's relationship with money was shaped by this early solitude. She'd grown up in relative poverty by royal standards, her mother's household maintained on a modest income, her childhood marked by economies that taught her the value of careful management. When she became queen, she suddenly had access to resources beyond anything she had known, and she responded not with extravagance, but with caution. The civil list provided her with £385,000 annually for the expenses of the crown, and she was determined to live within this allowance. Prince Albert, when he arrived in her life, reinforced and refined these instincts. He was genuinely interested in efficiency, in making systems work better, in extracting maximum value from available resources. Together, they reformed the royal household, eliminating redundancies that had accumulated over generations of careless management. The savings were substantial, and Victoria invested them wisely, building a personal fortune that would sustain her through her long widowhood and provide inheritances for her many descendants. Your dreaming mind follows Victoria through the years of her marriage, those happy years when Albert filled her life with purpose and passion. You see them in the private apartments, surrounded by their growing family, 9 children who filled the palace with noise and activity. The nurseries were constantly in use, one baby following another with scarcely a pause for breath. The economics of royal child-rearing were substantial, each prince and princess requiring a household of nurses and tutors, each one representing both expense and investment in the future. But dreams are not bound by chronology, and suddenly Albert is gone. The scene shifts, darkens, and you find yourself in a palace shrouded in mourning. Victoria has withdrawn into grief so complete that it resembles madness. She wears black, will wear nothing but black for the remaining 40 years of her life. Albert's rooms are preserved exactly as he left them, his clothes laid out each morning, his shaving water brought to his washstand. The palace has become a mausoleum, its life suspended, its queen invisible to the nation she's supposed to serve. The economics of grief are rarely considered, but Victoria's mourning had real costs for the monarchy. Her absence from public life eroded support for the institution. Republicans gained strength, arguing that a queen who would not perform her functions was a queen the nation did not need. The value of the monarchy, its contribution to national life, was called into question in ways that would have been unthinkable during the active years of her reign. Victoria eventually emerged from this darkest period, coaxed back into public life by patient ministers and by her own sense of duty. But she was never again the vibrant young queen who had danced until dawn at palace balls. She was something else now, something more solemn and enduring. The grandmother of Europe, they would call her, matriarch of a vast extended family whose members sat on thrones across the continent. Your dream shifts again, carrying you forward through the years to the reign of her son. Edward VII was everything his mother was not: sociable, pleasure-loving, impatient with the restrictions of his position. He had waited more than 60 years to become king, the longest anyone had ever waited for the British throne, and he was determined to enjoy himself. The palace under Edward was transformed, its rooms filled once again with light and laughter, its corridors busy with guests arriving for the endless entertainments he loved to host. Edward's approach to money was equally different from his mother's careful management. He had spent his years as Prince of Wales accumulating debts that scandalized the respectable and delighted the gossips. Gambling, horse racing, entertaining on a lavish scale, maintaining establishments in multiple locations, all of it required funds that his allowance could not cover. He borrowed from wealthy friends, from bankers, from anyone willing to extend credit to the future king. In your dream, you see Edward in these rooms, perhaps in this very suite, hosting one of his famous house parties. The guests are the cream of society, aristocrats and actresses, financiers and foreign royalty, all of them drawn into Edward's glittering orbit. The champagne flows freely, the conversation sparkles, and somewhere in the background servants calculate the cost of each evening's entertainment, figures that would make a Victorian butler blanch. But Edward also understood something about the economics of monarchy that his mother had forgotten during her long seclusion. The crown existed in relationship with the nation, and that relationship required maintenance. By being visible, by being sociable, by embodying the pleasures and aspirations of his age, Edward rebuilt popular affection for the monarchy. The investment in entertainment paid dividends in loyalty that would sustain the institution through challenges yet to come. The dream carries you onward, through the brief reign of George V and into darker times. You find yourself in the palace during the First World War, its corridors quieter now, its entertainments curtailed, its occupants anxious and sleepless. George was a dutiful man, perhaps too dutiful for his own comfort, and the weight of war pressed heavily upon him. Each day brought news of casualties, lists of the dead that seemed to grow longer with every passing week. The economics of war transformed the monarchy as they transformed everything else. The extravagances of the Edwardian era became impossible, improper, almost treasonous in a time of national sacrifice. The royal family publicly embraced austerity, reducing their household expenses, limiting their consumption, showing solidarity with subjects who were losing sons and husbands in the trenches of France. Whether this solidarity was genuine or performative mattered less than its effect. The monarchy emerged from the war more popular than it had been before. George made one decision during the war that would shape the monarchy's future in ways he could not have foreseen. In 1917, with anti-German feeling running high, he renounced all German titles and changed the family name from Saxe-Coburg-Gotha to Windsor. The economics of this decision were intangible but real. By severing ties with his German relatives, by embracing an English identity that was partly invented, George aligned the crown with the nation in a way that paid enormous dividends in public affection. Your dreaming mind drifts forward again, past the abdication crisis that nearly destroyed the monarchy, past another terrible war to the long reign of Elizabeth II. You see her as a young woman, unexpectedly thrust onto the throne by her father's early death, facing a world that was changing faster than anyone could have predicted. The empire her great-great-grandmother had ruled was crumbling. The social order that had supported the monarchy was dissolving, and she would have to find new ways to justify an ancient institution. Elizabeth approached this challenge with a pragmatism that her forebears might not have recognised. She understood that the monarchy could no longer take public support for granted, that it would have to earn its place in national life through service and adaptation. She opened the palace to tourists, allowing ordinary people to walk through the state rooms that had once been reserved for the elite. She agreed to pay income tax, ending an exemption that had become politically unsustainable. She permitted television cameras into her home, demystifying the institution even as she maintained its essential dignity. The economics of Elizabeth's reign were characterised by this careful balance between tradition and innovation. The sovereign grant system, established during her lifetime, created a transparent mechanism for funding the monarchy that replaced the older, more opaque arrangements of the civil list. The Crown estate, that vast portfolio of property accumulated over centuries, was firmly established as a national asset managed for public benefit, with the monarch receiving only a percentage of its revenues. In your dream, you see Elizabeth in these private apartments, perhaps in this very corridor, walking alone in the early morning hours before the palace woke. She was said to be an early riser, taking her breakfast with her dogs, reading the newspapers before anyone else was stirring. The solitude of monarchy was something she understood deeply, had lived with for 7 decades. All those nights in this palace, all those mornings waking to the weight of duty, the endless round of red boxes and audiences and ceremonies. The dreams of monarchs must be strange, weighted with responsibilities that ordinary sleepers cannot imagine. Victoria dreamed of Albert surely night after night through her long widowhood. Edward dreamed perhaps of pleasure, of the freedom he could never quite attain. George dreamed of duty, Elizabeth of service, each of them finding in sleep some respite from the burdens of their waking hours. And now you dream of them, your sleeping mind gathering their stories like flowers from a vast garden. You are part of this succession now, another dreamer in a palace of dreams, your rest connected to theirs across the years. The bed beneath you has held other bodies, other breathing, other passage into the unconscious realm. You join a company of sleepers stretching back nearly 2 centuries. The dream begins to fade, its images growing softer and less distinct. Victoria's small, determined figure dissolves into shadow. Edward's laughter echoes and falls silent. George and Elizabeth merge into a single presence, a sense of duty embodied but no longer visible. You are sinking deeper now, past the level where dreams take narrative form, into the darker waters where only peace remains. The monarchs retreat to their own rest, their stories told for tonight, their presence acknowledged and released. You do not need to carry their burdens. You are only a guest here, welcomed for a night, permitted to share in the sanctuary they created. Your role is simply to sleep, to rest, to receive the gift that this place offers. The last thing you see, before the dream fades entirely, is a long corridor stretching into darkness. Doors line both sides, each one leading to another room, another story, another life lived within these walls. The corridor seems to go on forever, disappearing into a distance that might be the past or might be the future. You understand that you could walk it for eternity and never reach the end, never exhaust the stories this palace contains. But you do not need to walk it now. The corridor is there, the stories are there, waiting for anyone who wishes to explore them. Tonight, you have walked far enough. Tonight, you have dreamed enough. Tonight, it is time to let even the dreams rest, to sink below the level where images form, to find the peace that lies beneath all thought. The corridor fades, the monarchs fade, the palace itself fades, becoming not an absence but a presence too vast and too gentle to be seen. You're held within it, cradled by it, protected by it. The dreams of those who came before surround you like a blessing, and in that blessing, deeper than dreams, you rest. Somewhere in the deepest part of sleep, your dreaming mind lifts gently from the bed and floats toward the windows of the Belgian suite. The heavy curtains part without resistance, the glass offers no barrier, and you find yourself drifting out into the night air above the palace gardens. It is not flight exactly, more a kind of suspended floating, weightless and peaceful, as if gravity itself has decided to release you for a while. Below you, the gardens spread out like a dark velvet cloth laid across the heart of London. 39 acres of private green space, invisible to the city that surrounds it, hidden behind high walls and dense plantings that shield it from curious eyes. By day, this garden would be a revelation of colour and form, carefully tended beds and ancient trees, winding paths and open lawns. By night, it is a mystery of shadows and shapes, silver where the moonlight touches, black where the trees cast their shelter. You drift lower, descending gently toward the great lawn that stretches from the back of the palace toward the lake. The grass is immaculate, maintained by a team of gardeners whose work begins before dawn and continues until the light fails. The economics of groundskeeping at this scale are substantial, with wages and equipment and supplies adding up to hundreds of thousands of pounds each year. But the result is a landscape of extraordinary beauty, a private park that rivals any public garden in the country. The lake comes into view as you float southward, its surface still and dark, reflecting the sky like a mirror laid flat upon the earth. This is not a natural feature of the landscape, but a creation of human will, excavated in the 1820s as part of John Nash's grand vision for the palace grounds. The soil removed from the digging was used to create artificial hills elsewhere in the garden, shaping the terrain to provide interest and variety in what had been relatively flat ground. The cost of creating this lake would have been considerable by the standards of the time, requiring gangs of labourers working with hand tools over many months. Today, such a project would be accomplished in weeks with modern machinery. but the result would likely be less beautiful. The slow accumulation of effort, the careful shaping by skilled hands gave the lake a naturalistic quality that mechanical precision rarely achieves. As you drift above the water, you notice movement at the edge of your vision. Pink forms are clustered near the shore, their long necks tucked against their bodies, their plumage ghostly in the dim light. These are the palace flamingos, descendants of birds that have lived in these gardens for decades. Their presence here is one of the more surreal details of Buckingham Palace, a touch of the exotic in the most English of settings. The first flamingos arrived as gifts, though the records do not always specify from whom or precisely when. Maintaining them requires specialized knowledge and resources, appropriate food, veterinary care, protection from the foxes and other predators that have found their way into even this most protected of urban spaces. The economics of keeping flamingos in central London are modest in the context of the palace's overall budget, but the decision to maintain them reflects something important about the nature of this place. Tradition matters here. What has been done continues to be done, simply because it has always been done. You float past the flamingos without disturbing their rest and continue your drift across the garden. The trees here are ancient, some of them planted when the palace was still Buckingham House, their roots reaching deep into soil that has been cultivated for more than 3 centuries. An oak stands near the western boundary that may have sprouted from an acorn during the reign of Queen Anne. Its trunk is massive, its branches spreading wide, its presence a living connection to a past that seems impossibly distant. The value of such trees cannot be measured in purely economic terms. They provide habitat for birds and insects, clean the air of pollutants, offer shade on hot summer days, and contribute to the psychological well-being of everyone who sees them. Studies have attempted to quantify these benefits, assigning monetary values to ecosystem services, but the numbers always feel inadequate. How do you put a price on 300 years of growth, on the accumulated weight of seasons and storms, on the simple fact of persistence in a world that changes so rapidly? Near the ancient oak, you notice a building that seems out of place in the garden's naturalistic design. This is the palace's tennis court, maintained for the use of the royal family and their guests. The facility is modest by professional standards, but perfectly adequate for recreational play. Its surface kept in good condition by staff who attend to it regularly. The economics of royal recreation are a small but real part of the household budget, covering equipment, maintenance, and the occasional instructor for those who wish to improve their game. Beyond the tennis court, the garden opens into a meadow that has been allowed to grow wild, its grasses and wildflowers providing habitat for bees and butterflies. This area represents a relatively recent change in the garden's management, a conscious decision to embrace biodiversity rather than manicured perfection. The economics of wildflower meadows are actually favourable compared to traditional lawns: less mowing, less watering, fewer chemical inputs, and healthier ecosystems as a result. The palace has established beehives in this part of the garden, their occupants producing honey that is used in the royal kitchens and occasionally given as gifts. Buckingham Palace. Honey has become a minor celebrity in its own right, its provenance lending it a cachet that no ordinary honey could match. The economics of beekeeping are modest, the cost of hives and equipment easily offset by the value of the product and the public relations benefits of environmental stewardship. You drift higher again, rising above the treetops to take in the full extent of the gardens. From this vantage point, you can see the palace itself, its rear facade, a long sweep of windows and columns, far more impressive than the relatively plain front that faces the mall. This is the private face of Buckingham Palace, the view that residents wake to each morning, the perspective that photographers rarely capture and tourists never see. The contrast between public and private is fundamental to understanding this place. The front of the palace, with its famous balcony and forecourt, is designed for ceremony and spectacle. The back of the palace, overlooking these gardens, is designed for living. The economics of this dual purpose are reflected in every aspect of the building's design and maintenance. Public spaces kept ready for visitors and cameras. Private spaces allowed to be simply comfortable. Garden parties are held here several times each year, events that bring together thousands of guests on the great lawn below. These parties are a peculiarly British institution, combining democratic access with traditional pageantry in a way that seems to satisfy both impulses. Invitations go to people from all walks of life: community volunteers, charity workers, teachers, nurses, anyone who has made some contribution to society that deserves recognition. The economics of these events are substantial, with catering, security and logistics combining to create costs that can exceed £100,000 per party. But the value generated by these gatherings is difficult to quantify. For many guests, an invitation to a garden party is the highlight of a lifetime, a recognition of service that no other reward could match. The monarchy's ability to bestow such recognition, to make ordinary people feel extraordinary for an afternoon, is a form of soft power that defies economic analysis. How do you calculate the value of a memory that someone will treasure for decades? You float toward the palace, drawn by some instinct toward the building that has become your temporary home. The windows of the Belgian suite are visible from here, dark rectangles in the long facade, and somewhere behind one of them your body lies sleeping, breathing slowly, resting while your dreaming mind wanders the gardens. The duality feels natural rather than strange, as if you've always been capable of being in two places at once, one self asleep and another self drifting through the night. The gardens below begin to blur as you approach the palace, their details softening into impressions of green and shadow. You're returning now, pulled back toward the warmth of your bed, the comfort of your room, the security of walls that have stood for nearly 2 centuries. The freedom of floating has been a gift, a perspective granted to very few, but sleep requires anchoring, and your anchor waits behind those dark windows. As you drift closer to the palace, you become aware of how quiet everything has become. The city beyond the walls is hushed, its traffic stilled, its millions of inhabitants surrendered to their own sleep. The guards at their posts are silent shadows, their vigilance unchanged but their presence almost invisible in the darkness. Even the birds in the garden have fallen quiet, their daytime songs replaced by the deep hush of the small hours. This is the heart of the night, the stillest point, the moment when sleep is deepest and the waking world seems most distant. You have floated through the gardens and seen their secrets, their beauty, their careful maintenance and quiet extravagance. You have understood, perhaps for the first time, that this private paradise exists not for show, but for living, not for tourists, but for the people who call this palace home. The window of the Belgian suite approaches, and you feel yourself being drawn through it, back into the room where your body waits. The passage is effortless, the glass no barrier to a dreaming mind, and then you are inside again, floating above your own sleeping form, looking down at yourself with a tenderness that surprises you. You see how peaceful you look, how completely relaxed, how utterly at home in this borrowed bed. Your breathing is slow and even, your face smoothed of all worry, your body surrendered to the mattress that supports it. This is what rest looks like. True rest, the kind that heals and restores and prepares the sleeper for whatever tomorrow may bring. Slowly, gently, you descend toward yourself. The dreaming mind reunites with the sleeping body, the two becoming one again, the separation of the garden journey dissolving like morning mist. You feel the weight of the blankets, the softness of the pillow, the warmth of the room. You're back, fully back, and the gardens you visited are already fading into the deeper levels of memory where dreams go to rest. The flamingos sleep by the lake. The ancient oak stands patient in the darkness. The wildflower meadow waits for tomorrow's bees. The palace guards maintain their silent watch. And you, in your borrowed bed in the Belgian suite, sink deeper into the comfort that surrounds you. The gardens will be there when you wake, waiting outside your window, ready to be seen in daylight if you choose to look. But for now they are a dream you have dreamed, a journey you have taken, a gift you have received. You carry their peace with you as you descend through the final layers of sleep, down into the darkness where no dreams form, where only rest remains. The palace holds you, the gardens surround you, the night enfolds you, and sleep, perfect and complete, claims you once more. Somewhere beyond the heavy curtains, beyond the ancient walls, beyond the sleeping gardens, the first suggestion of dawn is beginning to gather. It is not yet light, not truly, but the absolute darkness of deepest night has softened almost imperceptibly. The black becoming charcoal, the charcoal preparing to become grey. Morning is coming, as it always does, as it has come to this palace for nearly 200 years, finding monarchs and servants and guests alike in their beds, drawing them slowly back toward waking. But not yet, not for you. The dawn is still distant, the night still deep enough to hold you, and sleep still has hours of peace to offer. You sink deeper into the mattress, feeling its support adjust to your body, cradling you in comfort that seems to have no bottom. The Belgian suite wraps around you like a cocoon, its walls holding the silence, its ceiling sheltering you from everything beyond this room. In the palace corridors, the first staff of the morning shift are beginning to stir. They move quietly, these early risers, understanding that their work must not disturb those who still sleep. The kitchens will be among the first areas to come alive, with breakfast preparations beginning long before the household wakes. The economics of feeding a palace are complex, with menus planned days in advance, supplies ordered and delivered, specialized dietary requirements accommodated without complaint. But you do not need to think about breakfast. You do not need to think about anything at all. The morning will bring its own demands, its own schedules, its own requirements. But none of that belongs to this moment. This moment belongs only to rest, to the continuing gift of sleep that the palace has offered you. The sovereign grant that funds the monarchy's official operations amounts to approximately £86 million per year in recent times. This money comes ultimately from the revenues of the Crown estate, that vast portfolio of property and investment that belongs to the sovereign in their official capacity. The arrangement represents a bargain struck between monarchy and nation. The sovereign surrenders the income from these assets to the treasury, and in return receives a grant to cover the costs of official duties. The mathematics of this exchange have favoured the nation for many years. The Crown Estate generates revenues exceeding £300 million annually, while the sovereign grant returns only a fraction of that amount. Critics argue that any comparison is misleading, that the Crown Estate would generate income regardless of who managed it, that the monarchy is an expense rather than a profit centre. Supporters counter that the institution brings benefits beyond simple accounting. Tourism, diplomacy, national unity, the intangible value of continuity in a changing world. But lying here in the Belgian suite, such debates seem very far away. The economics of monarchy, important as they are to those who study them, have nothing to do with the peace you feel in this moment. The pillow beneath your head does not care about cost-benefit analysis. The blankets covering you are indifferent to parliamentary scrutiny. Sleep requires no justification, and rest pays no taxes. The morning routines of a working palace are elaborate and precisely choreographed. Housemaids will soon begin their rounds, tidying rooms and replacing flowers, emptying waste bins and straightening cushions. Footmen will lay tables and polish silver, preparing for whatever meals and meetings the day may hold. The private secretary's office will review the monarch's schedule, confirming appointments and anticipating complications. All of this activity will take place quietly, efficiently, invisibly, so that when the principal residents of the palace wake, everything will be exactly as it should be. The economics of this invisible labour are significant. Hundreds of people work at Buckingham Palace, their salaries and benefits representing a substantial portion of the household budget, but their contribution cannot be measured only in money. They are the human infrastructure that makes the institution function, the hands and minds that maintain the building, execute the ceremonies, and ensure that the monarchy can do its work. Without them, the palace would be merely a building. With them, it becomes something more, a living institution, capable of adapting and enduring. You turn slightly in your sleep, adjusting your position without waking, your body seeking even deeper comfort. The sheets rustle softly, the mattress shifts to accommodate your movement, and then stillness returns. The clock on the mantelpiece continues its quiet measurement of time, each tick a tiny footstep carrying the night forward toward morning. But there are still many ticks remaining, many footsteps yet to fall, and you need not hurry toward the light. The red boxes will arrive later this morning, as they arrive every morning of every day of the year. These leather-covered dispatch cases contain the paperwork of government, documents requiring the sovereign's signature, briefings on matters of state, communications from ministers and officials. The monarch works through these boxes daily, a constitutional duty that has continued unchanged for generations. The economics of this work are invisible but real. The sovereign's role in governance, however ceremonial it may appear, requires genuine attention and time, but the red boxes are tomorrow's concern, or rather today's concern for whoever occupies the private apartments. They are not your concern. You're only a guest here, welcomed for a night, allowed to sleep in a bed that history has hallowed. Your obligations are simpler, only to rest, only to receive the gift of peace that this place offers, only to let go of everything that does not belong to this moment of quietude. Outside the windows, the sky continues its imperceptible lightening. The stars are fading one by one, their light dimmed by the approaching sun that has not yet risen. The moon, if there is a moon tonight, is sinking toward the western horizon, its work of illumination nearly complete. Soon the birds will begin to stir, the first tentative notes of dawn chorus breaking the perfect silence. But not yet. Not quite yet. The value of the monarchy to Britain's economy has been debated endlessly, with studies producing figures that vary wildly depending on methodology and assumptions. Some estimates suggest that the royal family contributes hundreds of millions of pounds annually through tourism, with visitors drawn to London specifically to see the palaces and ceremonies associated with the crown. Others argue that these attractions would remain popular regardless of whether a living monarch occupied them, that tourists would come to see Buckingham Palace even if it were simply a museum. The truth probably lies somewhere between these positions, in territory too complex for simple calculation. The monarchy is woven into Britain's national identity in ways that resist quantification. The ceremonies, the traditions, the sense of continuity with the past, all of this has value that cannot be captured in spreadsheets. Whether that value justifies the cost is a question each generation must answer for itself, and the answer has always been yes, at least so far. But lying here, in the deepest hours of your sleep, such questions dissolve into irrelevance. The palace exists. You are here. The night has held you safely, and the morning will release you gently. The economics of empire and institution, of tourism and tradition, belong to waking minds. Your sleeping mind has other concerns, or rather no concerns at all, only the peaceful emptiness of rest. The household will wake in stages, consciousness returning to the palace like a tide coming in. First the earliest staff, those whose work begins before light. Then the administrative personnel, arriving at their desks to prepare for the day. Then the senior officials reviewing schedule and briefings. And finally, in the private apartments, the principal residents themselves, rising to face another day of duty and ceremony. This progression has repeated itself thousands of times since Victoria first made this palace her home. The details have changed, the faces have changed, the world beyond the walls has transformed beyond recognition, but the rhythm remains constant. Night yields to morning, sleep yields to waking, rest yields to activity. The palace breathes in and out, contracts and expands, sleeps and wakes, just like the people it shelters. You are part of that rhythm now, your sleeping breath joining the respiration of the building, your stillness contributing to the quietude of the night. When you wake, you will rise and dress and leave this room, returning to whatever life awaits you beyond the palace gates. But for now, you belong here as completely as anyone has ever belonged. The palace has accepted you, absorbed you, made you part of its ongoing story. The morning that will eventually arrive does not demand your attention. You do not need to anticipate it, prepare for it, worry about it. It will come when it comes, bringing its own light, its own warmth, its own invitation to rejoin the waking world. Until then, you are free. Free to sleep, free to rest, free to float in the peaceful darkness that the palace has gathered around you. The sounds of the building have grown even quieter as the night has deepened, the clock seeming to tick more slowly, the settling of walls and floors reduced to the faintest possible sighs. This is the hush before dawn, the stillest moment when sleep is deepest and the world seems to hold its breath. You hold your breath too, or rather your breath holds itself, slowing to match the rhythm of the night, Each exhale a small release. Each inhale a gentle renewal. Tomorrow does not exist yet. Yesterday has dissolved into memory. There is only now, only this moment, only this bed, and this room, and this palace, and this perfect, unbroken peace. The economics of time are simple here. There is enough for everything, enough for nothing, enough for simply being alive and asleep and safe. The Belgian suite holds you like a mother holds a child, with warmth and without demand. The night holds the palace like the earth holds a seed, with patience and with promise. The palace holds you like history holds a moment, gently, knowing that everything passes but nothing is truly lost. You're not quite awake and not quite dreaming. You have passed beyond both states into something simpler, something closer to pure existence. The thoughts that might trouble a waking mind have dissolved. The images that might populate a dreaming mind have faded. There is only breath, only heartbeat, only the gentle fact of being alive in this extraordinary place. The dawn continues its slow approach, but it is patient. It knows you will wake when you are ready, not before. It knows the palace will release you when the time is right, not sooner. It knows that this night, this sleep, this peace is a gift that should not be rushed or interrupted. The light will wait for you. The morning will wait for you. The world will wait for you. And you, held in the ancient arms of Buckingham Palace, need do nothing but rest. Need think nothing but peace. Need be nothing but exactly what you are in this moment. A sleeper, a dreamer, a guest, a soul, finding sanctuary in walls that have sheltered so many before. The night stretches on, unhurried, infinite, kind, and you stretch with it, floating in comfort, dissolving into rest, becoming one with the silence that surrounds you. There is no morning yet. There is only now, and now is perfect, and so the night holds you, gently, completely, asking nothing in return. You have walked through gilded corridors and climbed grand staircases. You have drifted through gardens where flamingos sleep and ancient trees stand watch. You have joined the long procession of dreamers who have rested within these walls, adding your breath to theirs, your peace to theirs, your story to theirs. The palace will stand tomorrow, as it has stood for nearly 2 centuries, sheltering whoever needs its shelter, holding whatever needs to be held. But tonight it holds only you, and that is enough. That has always been enough. The monarchs who came before have shown you something true, that even those who carry the heaviest burdens must eventually close their eyes. That rest is not a luxury, but a necessity, woven into the fabric of every human life. That sleep comes to all of us, gentle and democratic, asking only that we receive it. You have received it well tonight. You have let go of the waking world and trusted in the darkness. You have allowed yourself to be held. Now let the last thoughts dissolve like morning mist. Let the palace fade into warmth and silence. Let everything become soft and still and far away. You are safe here. You are welcome here. You are home. Sleep now. Simply sleep.